You ever see a video with a really stupid title, so you figure it's probably some form of joke or satire, then you watch it and find out it's really someone's honest opinion? Then you're ready to just laugh it off as something that most who see it would find impossible to take seriously. And you see it has over 26,000 people who have watched it and only 132 disliked it, while over 760 have liked it. Such was the case for me on a video titled, "Women Ruin Education."
Why is it that women feel the need to ruin everything they touch? It's a simple question.
No, it's not a simple question. You're not even using it as a question here, you're using it as a claim. The very premise is so outlandish and disagreeable, it's clear you'll have to devote everything else you say here to attempting to validate it. Your premise or claim here is that each woman on the planet feels a need to ruin everything she touches. So if you're really looking for an answer to your simple question, it's they don't. Applying nearly any claim ubiquitously to either gender is bound to be false, but I am certainly intrigued by the evidence you have for making such a bold assertion about every woman on Earth.
Everything they come into contact with, it's like they immediately get into parasite mode and start to destroy it. And in this case, I'm talking about the school system.
So everything women come into contact with, they become parasites toward an attempt to destroy? That means they would want to sustain themselves off of everything else they contact. So how do you explain the single mothers who were abandoned by their partners and devoted their lives to working tirelessly to support their children independently? Or those who adopt and raise orphans altruistically? Or those who do volunteer work selflessly? How do you explain every working woman in the world who contributes to society, pays taxes, and lives her life no less dependently or parasitically than the average man? Well, by your logic, women come in contact with children, so they should have a parasitic relationship with them, and their jobs, and society itself. Are you ready to back off of this clearly flawed claim yet? I can't wait to hear how you explain that women are parasites of education, a field that has historically been largely contributed to by women.
Now, the purpose of this video is to inject a new idea about education into the minds of men who are interested in ending the misandry at all costs. Gender-segregated schools is what I propose.
Separate schools for boys and girls already exist. Not every school at any level is co-ed by default. That's why the word co-ed exists, because some entire schools and colleges and dorms are segregated by gender. I don't mean to burst your bubble, but there are pros and cons to either method, and neither system demonstrates some form of massive holistic superiority over the other. Go on, though.
I call for the complete separation of males and females in the secondary education system, to which we will devote an exactly equal amount of taxpayer dollars. Now, to be realistic, this will most likely not happen, as the feminists would go nuts after hearing that, but hypothetically speaking, let's explore what would happen, or what would be the result of the adoption of it.
Well, secondary education is high school. College is post-secondary, which it seems like your follow-up example refers to. I can say one thing you got right is that complete gender segregation at the high school and college levels is probably never going to happen as a mandate throughout the entire country. It's not because feminists would rise up against it either. Most young men and women, including those highly focused on their studies, prefer to attend co-ed schools, which is why they choose to do so. You're advocating that we remove people's right to a co-ed education and their choice to a co-ed post-secondary education. Also, the education budget is stretched about as thin as it can be right now, with belts tightening annually in most states. You're suggesting that we magically build and staff twice as many high schools and colleges just to mandate gender segregation. I can't wait to hear why.
Now, for the past 2 semesters in school, I've noticed more and more females in my chemistry and math classes, and this semester was the first time that I counted an equal number of men and women in my chem class.
Oh, so the data for your proposal is entirely based on your experience this semester in your chemistry lab class. I guess we better alert the Secretary of Education and get the word out that someone who feels all women are destructive parasites has personally observed something to confirm his own sexist bias. That seems like a reasonable and reliable basis for a mandatory segregation of the entire education system.
So the general behavior of the females throughout the semester were as follows. Every week, we'd have to turn in a lab report, and it was up to each individual student to figure out exactly what the lab report was asking and how to use our lecture notes and whatever else we needed to get it done. So what you saw happen, almost without exception, is that the men got to work on the lab within the next day or two, and they would sit there and do the work and learn. That's right, I said learn. Now, our labs would be due every Thursday before we started next week's labs. So every Wednesday, without fail, almost every single girl in the class would be tracking down their respective manginas to waive the false prospect of the remote possibility that she might actually like said mangina in order to get them to explain bit by bit, piece by piece, everything she had to do, how to write it down, and then they would just end up writing it down for her anyway when she was still too incompetent and lazy to do it for herself. And this happened without fail every single week. Now, there were 2 or 3 of us, myself included, that refused to help any women at all, but most of the men carried the women through the course and practically did all the work for them.
When I was in college, the average lab class had about 30 students in it, much smaller than a lecture hall. You said that in this particular semester, the female students reached nearly an equal number to male students, which means that you're calling for a complete gender segregation for the entire country based on the behavior of about 15 young women during one lab class one semester. Even if I were to believe that not a single young woman in your class independently did her homework, which I don't, that's not even close to a fair sample size for you to draw conclusions about all of Western society's education. My college lab class experience was nothing like yours. I didn't see a single female student exhibiting the behavior you're describing, and as I recall, the females slightly outnumbered the males in that lab. That alone presents a complete contradiction to what you've described, with just as much evidence, and that's not hard to supply when the standard you've set for evidence is purely anecdotal. There are also some classes that you need to take in college which have nothing to do with your career path, and if a student is in one of those classes just doing what he or she has to get by, that's human nature at work, not female nature. In my experience, both in college and as a high school teacher, I've seen a comparable number of male and female students who lean on their peers to carry them through academic rigor assigned to them on any given subject or day. I've seen students use peer pressure to get that help. I've seen good-looking popular girls use a pretty smile to get that help from guys like you're describing here. And I've seen good-looking popular guys flash a flirtatious smile to get the same help from girls. So it's not one gender taking exclusive advantage of another. Both will do what you're describing and find other ways to motivate their peers to help them apart from what you're describing. And they do so within their peer groups of the same gender too. I sure hope you have better evidence than this for accusing all women on the planet of being destructive parasites.
And this is the pseudo-education that many of these women who are graduating into the math and sciences used to proclaim as evidence of their independence. And then you couple this with affirmative action for women, and it becomes apparent real fast that women will employ their sex as a means of obtaining degrees that they simply are not qualified for and have not earned. And this is why I called for gender segregation in universities.
So you feel that many of the women who earned degrees in the fields of math and science actually just had men do all of the work for them in college. Did these men take their exams for them? Did they perform the lab work in front of professors and inspectors for them? Most importantly, what about after the men earned those women's degrees for them? Did they submit their sterling male resumes on behalf of those women? And did they interview for them? If these women are really just pseudo-educated, then once they achieve employment with their degrees in math or science, then how do they keep those jobs if they really don't know any of the material for themselves? Didn't you think that would become evident in their work, that they don't actually know the things that they were hired with the pretense of knowing? Do you see how everything you're saying here sounds more like conjecture motivated by the absolutist and sexist bias that you started your video by declaring?
Now, you have feminists taking every opportunity to claim that women are surpassing men in education, and women now hold the majority of degrees, so women shouldn't need us incompetent men to hold them back. Let's segregate the school systems.
Just because one demographic is not by and large dependent on another demographic doesn't mean they should be segregated. For example, the Hispanic students in my class could still be academically successful even without the black students in my class. Do you see how stupid it would be to conclude from that we should segregate them from each other because of it? As bad as your reasoning was before, it's actually gotten worse by suggesting we remove gender diversity just because we could. Now, I realize that you're implying something would happen to these women if we did that, but I'll let you explicitly claim that before responding.
Now, what would happen if we had equally funded male-only and female-only universities in the West? Well, what you would see happen within a span of 5 years or so is that the female-only schools would start to inevitably gravitate towards the humanities, and after maybe a decade or so, you would see a complete lack of any engineers, scientists, or doctors, or pretty much any fields that make civilization run, and you would see the male-only schools producing the next generation of scientific intelligentsia. You would see the male-only schools flourishing and the female-only schools stagnate.
Oh, is that what we'd see? And how did you arrive at these figures? How did you determine what would happen in 5, then 10 years? Just kind of pulled those numbers out of thin air, did you? It seems like you haven't paid much attention to the emphasis on credibility for your assertions in those college classes you're taking, have you? I'm not saying every argument made in a YouTube video needs an MLA Works Cited page, but if you're going to sincerely call for the national mandated educational segregation of every school, then you need some better facts behind it than pure conjecture based on your interpretation of how some girls in one of your classes behaved. But let's humor your suggestion that in 1 decade, those female schools wouldn't even have math and science programs. So in your proposed system, women wouldn't even have a chance to study advanced math or science eventually. I guess the hundreds of women throughout history who have made significant scientific and mathematical discoveries, inventions, and advancements all should have been required to attend schools that didn't offer classes in those fields. And I guess men whose intellects favor humanities and linguistics, they should just be forced to become engineers, even if they're not good at it, because they're men, huh? Oh, and apparently even a school focused on humanities can't flourish. Only one that's focused on what you happen to be interested in would flourish, provided it's exclusively populated by men, of course. I can't wait to see where you're going with this concept.
And the reason for this is because ever since women have been allowed to enter the school systems of the West, they've done what they do best. They've become parasitic off of men and expected us to do all the heavy lifting for them. And I, for one, am sick of these useless leeches that think they're entitled to not having to put the work in like the rest of us. Do your work. We are sick of carrying you for once in your life. Earn what you want, you useless, incompetent miscreants. Men are not there to educate you. You should educate yourself.
Wow, so pretty much just a whole bunch of insults based on the assertion you've made about women, where you go on to speak from the perspective of all men. I happen to be a man who severely struggles with math. I needed a lot of help to get through my math classes, and in doing so, I often relied on my peers to re-explain things to me that the teacher had already gone over more than once. Most of those peers who were willing and able to help me happened to have been females, who happened to have been paying better attention than my male peers who weren't as concerned with scholastic endeavors. I sure am glad, for the sake of my own education, that those young ladies didn't insist that they were sick of me being a useless leech and remind me that it wasn't their job to educate me, and when I asked for help, they didn't gladly insist for me to do my own work and educate myself, because that's not what education really is. I didn't realize people even existed who considered that attitude to be a positive thing in regard to education.
Now, with that said, I don't believe this will ever happen, and this is why I'm proposing that men start to wage war on the education system. And by that, I mean clandestine recognizance of the math and science curricula. And what I mean by that is that we need to start secretly recording with laptop cameras and other recording devices video lectures of every class of every math and science curricula available in our universities, and then start adapting these lectures to our own curricula. That's right, in order to undermine the feminist universities, we need to start stealing their curricula with the use of recording technology, and we need to send out men that are willing to fight for the gender war and the betterment of men into the women's studies programs and record and post the misandry that's being indoctrinated into the youth.
There's some sage wisdom embedded in a classic film that I think would do you some good here, and phrasing of which is just so refined and astute in its raw form that I'm not going to do it the injustice of quoting it. So just listen to this advice for yourself.
Everybody knows you never go full retard. You went full retard, man. Never go full retard.
Let me try to follow what you've said men need to do. 1. Wage war on the education system. I thought you wanted to reform the education system to one that's strictly segregated, but if you want to wage war on something, you do so to destroy, defeat, or conquer it. You seem to think men should secretively record content of science and math classes? Okay, then you said by that you meant secretly recording university lectures of math and science, then adapting them to your own curricula? What? This is already your own curricula. There are classes that you're already in, so why are you advocating for men to start recording these lectures? What's that supposed to accomplish? Isn't the information already available to you, and isn't it already perfectly legal for you to take notes or use a tape recorder during class lectures? The spreading of this material is what classes are for. And then you say you're doing all this to steal the curricula from the feminist universities? I don't know how you made this jump. And you're going to go to what is currently an all-women's college, which your earlier points suggest you don't even realize already exist. Then you're going to get into their classes somehow and steal the lecture information? It's as if you think that those classes are teaching something special that isn't being taught in the same classes for a male or co-ed college. And that's also not really stealing, because you're not taking it away from them in any way. It's not like they can't continue to teach it because you've recorded it. And all of this is somehow enhancing your side of the gender war and the war you're proposing men to wage against the education system? Nearly 800 people clicked like on this shit.
We must declare war on the learning centers of the West, and we must do it relentlessly. And we have to obtain all their useful knowledge and expose their misandry by the use of recording technology. It's just that simple. And once we've obtained these curricula in math and science, we need to make them available to men and men only. To avoid the legal ramifications, we should never post the actual video that we've taken from these universities, but recreate them, lecture for lecture, and make them available to men. Not women, but men.
What? You're going to take video of class lectures that are apparently only given in female universities, despite your earlier claims that females are scientifically and mathematically inept, and rely entirely on men to carry them through such studies. Then, you're going to replicate those lectures and somehow post them to a forum on which you'll be slapping a No Girls Allowed sign? Or does every man get a password emailed to him, or what? How does any of this work?
And this is just one of the many ways that we can undermine government control over knowledge and education. And these are things that I, as a man, am interested in.
You're posting this video on the internet, the information superhighway, where average citizens, men and women, have more power than they ever have at any point in history to find and share information. And you think the government is somehow holding back information from men and showing favoritism to women? Is that what you're getting at? This government which subsidizes co-ed universities with equal opportunity for young men and women? Really?
I mean, we can't just sit here and wait for the collapse. We have to help bring it about. We have to give the feminists exactly what they wanted. The collapse of Western society. And a Western education system that's so indoctrinated with feminist leeches needs to be further starved by men so that it's forced to either burn the leeches and their humanities off its body or face exsanguination. And I want to be clear on what the litmus test for valuable information and curricula actually is.
Oh, so you want to bring on the collapse of all Western education through this process. What was the title of your video again? It doesn't matter. It sounds good. Okay, so please tell me all about what sort of things qualify as education and what things don't belong in school.
If the only type of job you can find after completing an education in your area of study is the reteaching of that area of study, then it is educationally useless and non-functional. So that means English, humanities, ethnic studies, American and world history, and of course women's studies. Shakespeare will never put a roof over my head, neither will the memorization of any culture or country's history.
So the only use or function of a branch of education is if it gets you a job apart from teaching it? So none of the people who have learned to speak or write better through English classes were in any way able to apply that to other areas of work or other meaningful areas of their lives? And nothing that enhances an individual's life, like an understanding of sociology or philosophy, has any educational merit? Do you realize that Educating a society in things like speaking, reading, history, and the like all contribute to that society. That's why people get paid to teach them. Society values literacy, verbal and written communication, for example. So we pay people to teach our kids how to read, write, and speak properly. According to you, there should be no English or history teachers out there, meaning students who may have been inspired to go into fields you considered pragmatic through those classes and cross-curricular teaching therein now won't be, and that self-education you told women to do before, nearly nobody will be able to do eventually because we're no longer allowed to educate our populace in reading. After all, they won't likely get a job as a professional reader, so why bother? And since you don't get a job out of understanding the voting process and the difference between dictatorships, monarchies, and democracies, we've no need to learn about that either. You don't see the value in teaching about cultures apart from your own because you abhor the very presence of diversity that has made your life as good as it is. Humans are not robots. Civilization is dependent on our coexistence. You don't seem to realize that the only reason you can enjoy multiple forms of food, music, holidays, dances, artwork, literature, film, and more is because people bothered to learn about the way that other people live differently and embraced it.
If people see African American or European or American history as something of importance, then it's up to them to learn and teach it to their people and the next generation of their people. The transmission of culture is the job of the people of these cultures, not of any kind of efficient and functioning education system.
And just how is an illiterate North American child supposed to spark up an interest and educate him or herself in European, Asian, or Australian culture? How are all of these people just supposed to educate themselves about their own history and the rest of the world in it when your ideal system forbids the structured teaching of anything just for the sake of learning? You're suggesting that we abolish education for education's sake and just hope that parents teach their own kids these things? I know that if I were to have children, I wouldn't be nearly as qualified to teach about the history of any given culture as the average history department of my local middle and high schools would be, let alone that of a college. I would hope that if my child takes an interest in such fields, he or she would have those areas of study available, even if there's no job market for being educated in them. Why? Because education and job training are not mutually exclusive.
Women's studies is perhaps the most useless field of study they ever created, as it perpetuates female entitlement and the unrestrained leeching and parasitism that feminism promotes.
Wouldn't women's studies involve the process by which females have become more independent from their male overseers and made their way to productive membership of modern society? How they've positively influenced the society that oppressed them through their diverse contributions to the arts, sciences, politics, and more? Isn't that quite different from being a parasite?
I'm going to be posting more and more videos with the free time that I have now that finals are over to lay out a roadmap of how we can undermine Western society and feminism. And that's all I'm really interested in. I'm not interested in making homosexuals feel comfortable in a men's movement that has no teeth, and I'm not interested in brokering a deal with feminists. I'm interested in the destruction of a misandric, racist, and immoral society that needs to fall. That's it.
You've called our society misandric, racist, and immoral, while negatively generalizing every woman on the planet as inferior, lazy, and parasitic, and suggesting that all formal studies of different cultures be banned from our education system. You've titled this video, Women Ruin Education, while explicitly calling for a war on education. Hypocrisy, thy name is you.